Hello everybody, hope you're doing okay and welcome to my cabin, or rather Tim's man cave in KT10 where I live, sponsored by Nike. Now actually I think that means that I sponsor them rather than the other way around. But anyway, the thought's there. Maybe one day I'll get some shoes given to me, but at the moment I have to pay for them all. So what I thought I'd do is give a bit of review of 2020 and give my sort of impressions of what my favourite shoes in different categories and indeed what are my least favourite shoes. So when I totted them up on Strava using the Velo Viewer app, which is a very handy one, I actually wore 43 different pairs of shoes for running in 2020, and of those 43 there were 39 different models and they were from 8 different brands, and I ran a total of 2,053 miles, which is not bad for me. I think my highest total ever is about 2,500. Now, it might have got a bit nearer that had I not had my calf tear in September and missed most of October and half of November. But yeah, not a bad year for running. Obviously, it wasn't a great year full stop, was it? I only managed to do 6 races, 2 before lockdown, a half marathon and a marathon, which bizarrely were my worst times ever. But in a way, some of my pleasing performances, my 2:56 marathon in Seville in February was a result of 6 months good training before that and a well-executed race. So I was well pleased with that. And I did then later in the summer 4 track races, and my 800 in 2:18 was my best time for 4 years, and on age graded my best time for many years. I think in my top 20 ever. So what shoe did I wear the most in 2020, which in a way is an indication of what shoe was my favourite? Well, it was actually this one, or rather several pairs of the Turbo 2, but this was the actual shoe that I actually wore the very most in 2020. This is the Nike Pegasus Turbo 2 SE edition. Now, I think SE stands for Special Edition, and it's basically just a few extra bells and whistles, like this sort of stripe at the back and this sort of speckled effect on the midsole. But it's quite a nice shoe because it also looks rather like a lifestyle shoe, but it really is a proper Turbo 2 shoe. And I've done some good runs in this. So, I've actually run 233 miles in this particular model, and I've also had another Turbo 2 model that I wore this year. So it totaled 317 miles altogether in that shoe. And then honourable mentions come for the next one was the Next Percent that I've got there above my Man Cave sign, and then very close for third and fourth between the Nova Blast and the Endorphin Speed. So my next category is what was my favourite shoe that I was influenced by watching a YouTube video. And I think it was actually the Forest of Dean runner to blame for this one. And it's his favourite, I think, which is the Nova Blast. Now, I've ever worn to Asics. I've always found them sort of a brand that does heavy stability shoes, and I've never really been drawn to it. And then this is one of 3 shoes that I actually got from Asics this year, although I think the Nova Blast was my favourite. The other 2 were the Road Blast and the Meta Racer. But I think this one was surprising because it was just such a nice sort of cushioned shoe. It felt quite like a Next Percent without any of the plate. A bit heavy and a bit wide for me would be the criticisms, but it's a shoe that if I wanted to run a nice easy run, that would always be my go-to shoe. So I've actually run 176 miles in this shoe this year, which is my 4th highest one, and very close for 3rd, actually only a mile less than Endorphin Speed. So my next shoe is, what shoe did I get this year which had the biggest wow factor when I put it on? It was a bit like when I first wore a 4% from Nike, that I thought, this is so amazing, such a different feeling. Well, it's kind of in a similar vein. It's actually the Dragonfly Spike. Now, probably not many people have spikes, but as a lifelong track runner, this is something I wished I would have had 20, 30 years ago. I mean, I actually ran a 3,000 metre race in this, and I haven't worn a spikes in a 3,000 metre race for about 4 years, and I think I would even run a 5k in it if I was able to have one. But it was a shoe that I actually wore for my 400 metre project to do my 62-second attempt and trying to beat the 60. So I was quite close to that. But my best race of the year was the 2:18 800 metre race that I wore in these, and actually won the race in a grading meeting in September. And just such a feeling of combination of sort of being fairly light, but just that sort of ZoomX layer just make you sort of feel like you want to just spring off the track. This is the shoe that Jessica Cheptegei used in his 5k and 10k track records, and also what Mo Farah used for his world record in the hour. And I think the shoe's not really sort of that radical. I think it's just the fact that the novel approach of actually putting a ZoomX layer into a spike actually managed to make a shoe that was just sort of so cushioned and responsive for running on the track. And then it has got a 6 spike plate there at the back, And it doesn't even have a carbon plate in it, apparently. It's just that red line there is what's called a P-Bax plate. So, in that sense, it wasn't even Nike's top shoe. I did eventually manage to get the Air Zoom Victory shoe, which is this one here. So, I haven't actually worn that yet. So, that would be one of my aims for 2021 to see how these two shoes compare. This shoe is more, the Zoom Victory shoe is more targeted to 8 and 15, whereas this is probably more of an endurance shoe. But for me these days, as being a bit slower, obviously at 54 than I was, I think this shoe would do well for me for any distance, and indeed that's what I did from 400 metres up to 3,000 of the races I did. So my next category is not actually a running shoe category at all. It's what is my favourite running gadget of the year. And I think it would have to be my Garmin Forerunner 945 here. I've actually got this on the screen when I've downloaded an Ordnance Survey map. So it does pretty much everything I want it to do. It does running, obviously, cycling, even golf. And occasionally, whenever I manage to get to the swimming pool, it does that as well. Pretty much an everything watch, and it's almost permanently attached to my wrist. I think as an honourable mention, I'd also put the Stride in there as well, because it's sort of a gadget you almost love to hate, really, because we spend so much time on forums discussing how it works and what all the power means, and does it produce a good estimation of your speed and distance. It's a device that just produces a lot of stats. You would see them feature a lot in my shoe off videos, so certainly a gadget that's been very useful for me through 2020. So let's do a few negative ones just for a bit of mix things up. So what was the shoe I got that perhaps I was most disappointed with? And I'd probably have to say it was this Nike Pegasus 37. This is a Nike by Tim version, i.e. a personalised one. I think I do quite like the colourway, even though I saved so myself. But I just found this disappointing. I think I was hoping for more. It just felt heavy without React. The lockdown was a bit suspect, and then it had a very shallow toe box. So wearing it felt like you were crushing your toes. And running down the road, although it's meant to be like an everyday shoe, not really a fast shoe, just seemed like sort of hard work. And I was sort of yearning to get back into a Turbo 2 or the Endorphin Speed or something like that. But I got it to 72 miles, got to give it a fair innings. And I think I'll probably try and use it again. But just a shoe that you feel like it promised so much more. And if they didn't use React in it and had a bit of ZoomX in there, made me charged about £30 more, it'd be just such a better shoe. But anyway, it is what it is. So what shoe did I think was the most confusing shoe of 2020? Well, it was probably actually this Adidas Adizero Pro. This is the low stack version. I think it was confusing because A, it was frustrating in the first place because it was so hard to get hold of. I remember I had about 3 or 4 tries to get one and singly failed in each time. And then when I did eventually get one, I kind of thinking, well, what's the point of this shoe? Because as soon as they came out and got it, they announced the Adios Pro, which was lauded up as their marathon shoe. And then I don't think Adidas even really knew themselves what this shoe was. And if you remember one of my shoe offs, I tested this up against the Boston 9, Adios 5, and SL 20, and this one. And they all tested about the same in speed, but this one is basically like twice the price. So I don't think I saw hardly anybody wearing it in a race. I did take it for one reasonable half marathon, sort of up-tempo-ish run. But even then I thought, oh, yeah, it was okay, but nothing special. And at £160, I was really struggling to see the point of it, and I don't think anyone else really knew what the point of it was either. And then it was even more confusing when they brought out the Adidas Adizero Adios Pro, just adding in Adios to a shoe that they already brought out with a bit more stack, which turned out to be the one that clearly was their top shoe, gave to all their elites, and this one was sort of heavily discounted. You could get in all sorts of colourways, and it was just odd. So what were my favourite shoes of 2020? I'd say by 2020 I'm going to include the shoes that I actually wore in 2020 regardless of whether they actually came out in 2020, because I think the review of the year from this point of view is what did I actually want to put on my feet, and that's how I define largely as favourite. Now I've already largely sort of told you what was my favourite shoe by telling you what shoes I wore the most, but just to repeat that, I'd say that my favourite sort of everyday trainer do-it-all thing was the Turbo 2, and here we are again, the same black one I showed you a minute ago. Now, if you think I'm a bit of a Nike fanboy, which is probably true, because I think of all the shoes that I have bought and used, Nike pretty much about half of them. So if I couldn't wear a Nike shoe, and in this category, what was my favourite do-it-all shoe this year? Well, I'd have to say the Endorphin Speed, which I think if the Turbo 2 is discontinued, which it seems to be, then I think at the moment this is a shoe that perhaps I would turn to the most. I don't quite like this one as much as the Turbo 2. I think the Turbo 2 just fits me a bit better, just feels a bit nicer. in terms of do it all. I think the plate in this one is sort of okay, but sometimes I feel that maybe just a bit too much. Just feel I prefer the Turbo 2, but this is a very, very good shoe, I have to say, and the other shoe tubers are really raving about it, and I can't really disagree. So if the Turbo 2 wasn't allowed to be worn anymore, and I can only wear this one instead, well, I wouldn't complain too much. And indeed, I've already bought a second version of this shoe, the New York colorway one, so I've been wearing that one as well. So what is my favourite road racing shoe? Well, absolutely no surprise at all that it's the Next Percent. It's the shoe that I've got the most number of shoes off at the moment. I've got actually 6 pairs in total, of which 2 are still in their box waiting to be used. And this is a shoe that actually came out sort of the second most used shoe of the year, even though there weren't many races. I actually used it for 255 miles altogether over a couple of versions of them. And I was using it for a lot of sort of my interval sessions, faster run days, a lot of my shoe testing as well. Very much the go-to shoe. I would say an honourable mention the Nike side to the Alpha Fly, because I actually sort of initially got that, thought I didn't really like it, but then I've had a few runs recently, especially on the treadmill, and I quite liked it. So in a way, I'd be quite keen to actually give the Alpha Fly a try out in a sort of a race or part run whenever we can do them again, perhaps in a low-key one, just to see how it turns out. So in terms of what was my favourite non-Nike racing shoe, well, I think it's quite a close call, but I think I would have to go for the Endorphin Pro. It may not be as fast as the Adios Pro, and I need to do more testing, but I think I just prefer the feel of this one. I mean, obviously the Endorphin Speed, the Endorphin Pro are very similar. I remember I did a shoe-off test where the Endorphin Pro just beat, in inverted commas, the Endorphin Speed by a little bit, and I think I just did prefer running in this one, especially when I was going up tempo. I did a nice half marathon effort on a hilly circuit just under 1:30, which was quite a good run in the summer. And that shoe-off test that day on another very nice summer's evening was also a very enjoyable one. I think I've done about 50 miles in this one. It's a shoe perhaps I'd wish I'd now to take out a bit more actually the months to come. But as you see, a white shoe, and it is still very white, isn't it? Then I think at the moment I'd be sort of frightened to take it outside for spoiling it. But if it gets a bit warmer weather or I fancy a bit of a treadmill one, maybe I'll give this one another go. And I think an honourable mention perhaps to the Adios Pro. Doesn't quite fit me as well, but there's some promising tests from it so far, and I think I've got a few more shoe-off tests to see which ones are going to be the best contenders for 2021. So in terms of my shoe resolutions for 2021, well, I think one mistake I continually make is buying shoes that actually I know almost before I buy them aren't going to work. I bought a pair of Infinity Reacts on sale for 60 quid just because I could. And I knew that they'd be too wide for me, and sure enough they were. So I wore them once and thinking, why did I bother to spend £60 on a shoe that I knew was going to work for me? I mean, it's not a bad shoe, and I'm sure if you've got a wide foot it'd be great, but you've got to sometimes just work out what's best for you. And when I do these shoe reviews, I have to really give my personal opinion on a shoe. I can't tell you how a shoe is going to feel when I'm a UK 13, how it's going to be if you've got a size 8 and you've got a wide foot. I think all I can do is give my opinions and hope you can make some inferences from them. So I'll try not to buy shoes that I don't think I'm going to like. And I think I'll have to include, unfortunately, Hoka in that, because I've bought 3 shoes from them now, the Carbon X, the Rocket X and the Rincon. And I haven't really liked any of them to any great extent at all. So I'm going to pass on the Carbon X2, which I see tantalising. I could have bought tonight in 3 colourways in a UK 13.5. But so I hope Andy, the FOD runner, is going to buy one and tell me what I'm missing. But really, I don't think that another Hoka shoe at the moment is going to be a good spending of my time and effort. So I'll leave that to some other reviewers to see what they make of that one. In terms of the shoes that I've heard that are coming out soon, I think the one that's perhaps most intriguing to me is the Brooks Launch 8. Now this is the Brooks Launch 6. Now I actually used the 5 and the 6 quite extensively a couple of years ago, and it was kind of my go-to everyday shoe, which the Turbo 2 largely superseded. I think when I got the Turbo 2, these ones sort of went out of my favour a bit, and then I heard that the Launch 7 was so terrible and so firm that I was rather put off getting one. Maybe one shoe that I'm actually pleased I didn't bother getting. But I've heard that the Brooks Launch 8 is a lot better, and so I'm hoping that won't be too expensive. And I think I won't make the mistake I did with the Hyperion Elite 2 of ordering the 12 when that was the biggest size that they did. So I think I'll go for a 13 in that, even though this is a 12. Give myself a bit more toe box room, and hope to see how that one is probably in a few months' time. The other shoe that I showed you earlier that I'm actually keen to have a go on, but almost scared to do so, is the Air Zoom Victory Spike. Now, this is a really weird shoe that you've got like the Zoom Air pockets here at the front and the Zoom X at the back. And I just put this shoe on, and just sort of standing up, the foot sort of sits completely on the front of the shoe, and actually my sort of heel was raised off the ground. So I was thinking, well, having just tore my calf, the last thing I really want is a shoe that I'm sort of having to stretch to actually put land on my heel at all. But I am a bit of a midfoot striker, and all spikes and stuff like that are designed for you to get forward. So I'd be really keen to try these out, but I'm also a bit scared to do so until I feel I got more strength in my legs. So reports and a comparison with the Dragonfly to come. And in terms of Nike shoes, well, I think there's the Air Zoom Invincible, which has got Zoom X in it. I mean, I'm a bit wary of that one because it seems like it could be quite a wide shoe, but I think that's going to be an intriguing one. I think that's probably one I'm going to try and pick up. And if they ever do something like this rumored Hyperfly shoe, which could be something like a Turbo 2 but with Zoom X, that may be the obvious replacement for the Turbo 2. Whether that's still on the drawing board or rumoured remains to be seen, but I'm sure that one, when it comes out, will be, as the name suggests, rather hyped and probably impossible to get, but we'll try our best. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this little review of all the shoes that I tried in 2020. Obviously, there's far more shoes I tried that I didn't mention, and I'll put up a list of all the ones that I did try and the number of miles I ran in them as a sort of postfix to this video. So thanks for watching. I hope you found it interesting. As ever, please subscribe if you can. I don't normally ask, but having more subscribers is always a good aim. And I look forward to seeing the next one. Thanks so much then. Bye.